Hi and welcome to A Mom's Truth. My name's Nadine Whitlinger and I am your host. I welcome you today to a solo episode. Something happened in our family the last week and a half or a week and a half ago, and that, just sparked the urge of sharing this with you. And yeah, so I'm just gonna get right into it. Our youngest was pretty unwell starting, probably a week and a half ago. He was really unwell out of the blue, refused his dinner, was really sleepy, and developed a pretty high fever pretty quickly. And I did mention it before that I'm not someone that's into pharmaceuticals much. So I just kind of tried to see how it plays out and support him with homeopathic remedies rather than, paracetamol or anything like that. And yeah, so that started on the Thursday night, and Friday was terrible. He didn't feel well at all. Saturday morning, I thought for a minute that he was looking a little bit more lively and that he was, maybe able to just leave the bed and play some Lego, or if, maybe I could have taken him out. That was my idea of taking him out just for, um, you know, 15 minutes or so, walking the dog around the block so he's got some fresh air and sun. But he did not feel really well. So I tried to assess the situation and asked him if he could point out if there was anything else that was hurting, or if it was really just that he was feeling really tired. And yeah, so he basically told me that he was having a tummy ache, and he mentioned it the day before. The day before, it was around his stomach area, and I actually believe that he was just feeling really unwell from the high temperatures that he had. There was a couple of other symptoms I don't want to get into right now, but that was basically it. So I, was not overly concerned about it. But what happened was that over the course of about 12 hours, the pain he had moved from the stomach area more towards the lower abdomen and was slightly on the right hand side. That's when I had a moment and I was like, oh God, I hope I don't miss an appendicitis, because, that can get pretty serious pretty quickly. So trying to go back into my childhood, every time you had a tummy ache and you went to the doctor and they were suspecting anything like that, they would have some sort of tests where they push down your right lower abdomen and let it go pretty quickly. And if, can't bear the pain, it's time that you really go and get it looked at, or that you can't move your legs properly up and down. So we just tried those tests, and it wasn't too bad. So I kind of just let him rest a little bit longer. I had to take the dog on a quick round, so I took the dog out. And as I came back, I was like, oh, I was still wondering if I have to go and take him to a hospital. And I will get into why I'm not the biggest fan of hospitals anymore these days shortly. But so basically, what happened was that even though we're in the area that we live in right now for just over 8 months, we have not seen any doctors or any hospitals. So I was kind of, putting it out in a group chat with some of the parents from our jiu-jitsu gym just to see where they would take their kids if they would have to go and see a hospital. And pretty quickly, I could realize how I started spiraling. I was like really stressed out. I was running around back and forth, and they are all symptoms that I recognized. So I tried to stay calm, but I could also realize that in this very moment, I couldn't. I was spiraling, and it was just getting worse progressively. So I decided to leave the room and went to my bedroom just so I'm not around my son, and so that he just does not get nervous if he sees me, spiraling and going all crazy. I messaged a friend and she called me, and I was very grateful in this moment. We had a quick chat and I explained to her that the symptoms I am experiencing right now, with like feeling really nervous, stressing out over something that hasn't even happened, and having all these flashbacks, made me realize that they are symptoms I've experienced previously, and that they're very similar to the PTSD symptoms that I had experienced prior. And just going back quite a few years earlier, I was like experiencing, my life was basically always like a wave. I felt really good. And then, you know, something happened that triggered a response in me, and I was going downhill, and I was emotionally not very well for a while. And that was connected to some childhood trauma. And I was diagnosed with PTSD many years earlier. So I know what those symptoms are like, what they feel like. But it was not until like 10 days ago that I felt like I was experiencing very similar, or even exactly these kind of symptoms, just related to something else. So that sparked like this whole thing, right? Because I am someone that just likes to reflect and tries to get into it. And I think that's also a good point here to go back in time to when I first was diagnosed with PTSD. It took me a long time to understand the symptoms, the triggers, and to build somewhat of a better tolerance window, if you want to call it like that, and not flip out right away, and trying to stay reasonable in certain scenarios. PTSD is nothing that will just go away. It's nothing that can be cured, but it is something that can be managed. And I think, I manage quite well. And those past five years have been like very different to all the years before, leading up to that point where I really looked for help and needed to understand better what was going on in my emotional life. And so when this happened 10 days ago or something like that, a week and a half, I just made the connection. I realized that some of those symptoms are very similar, and it's not normal behavior when one of your children is unwell and you have to seek medical attention. And as I was thinking about this last week, also about recording this episode, there was no episode last week because, long story short, after he was on the mend, I just started feeling unwell, and I was trying to rest as much as possible because I had to take my adult son to Melbourne for a big jiu-jitsu competition, and that was really important to him. So there was no way we could cancel that. So I canceled all my other plans and recordings for last week and really just focused on getting physically better. And it's been a bit of a nasty week. I'm still feeling pretty tired and have a headache and things like that. So it's taken time, but yeah, I had lots of time to think about, what I would like to share in this episode. And for me, this is something that's really important. And I think this is important for many, many people out there. When COVID came around, some people call it pandemic, other people call it scamdemic. You can call it whatever you wanted. I usually just call it when COVID came, but COVID didn't actually come, in my opinion. But that's not what I would like to get into here right now. But what happened was that during this time, there was without a doubt a lot of crazy stuff happening. And I think or I don't think I know that this is stuff that needs to be shared. And I think it's important that many other people come forward and share their stories. And it's not that we're telling these stories to, because we want to be the victims in this whole story. That's not what this is about. This is about being heard, because some of the things that happened during that time were absolutely horrendous. And still to this day, sometimes of some of the experiences I had during that time, I can't believe this really happened. It feels like a big dream. And although it would feel maybe good if, some of the people we had disagreements with about whether you would like to go and get the jab or not, or what your opinion about it all was. There's a lot of things we could disagree on. Although it might feel good for some of us to hear yeah, you were right. I'm sorry, getting the apology and acknowledgement. This is not what this episode is about. This episode is about the importance of people to share their stories, because what I realized with me experiencing these symptoms and spiraling and not knowing where to go, being afraid to seek medical help because of some of the experience that we had. That's something that's extremely concerning, and that shows to me that there's a lot more for me personally that I have to work through. And I'm very certain that there are a lot more people out there that have gone through maybe worse or similar situations, and they're just not being heard. Like, no one is interested in these stories anymore. It's kind of swept under the rug. And one of the stories, for example, and I'd like to say at this point that I was sitting on the fence for a very long time with a lot of things, wearing the masks and all of those things. I was sitting on the fence for a long time, and I did even follow along for a long time, even though sometimes I was really wondering, I'm like, this is so stupid. But some of the things I did not question, I just followed along. It was sort of a process, and eventually I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, because we're setting an example for our kids. And if we don't believe in something but follow along, I mean, what does that say about us? And yeah, so that was that. And coming from medical science background, for me, there was no way that they would whip up a vaccine so quickly. So in the beginning, although I was very certain that I was not going to get any experimental drugs, because I just don't want it. My body is too important to me. I was convinced that they wouldn't even, whip it up in time. Anyhow, we all know that things went differently. And so very quickly, my life changed, because I had to be able to express. Yeah, like in the beginning, I was trying to fall a bit under the radar, especially in my old workplace that I was working at the time. But at some point, I started coming a bit forward, and I was making clear that there was no way that I'm following along and that I'm getting experimental drugs injected into my body that have not been on the market for even, I don't know, weeks, and we're already injecting it into old people in old people homes and things like that. So that was that. But what then happened was that basically I was for the first time exposed to people not being able to people just not being okay with my opinion. And things got really nasty really quickly. And this was basically a threat throughout our entire life. It was not just at work, it was in other places also. And what happened was that the more we started questioning things and the more we started looking into things, the less a lot of the things that went on and were required of us to comply with did actually not make sense at all. So, ultimately you're getting put into the corner of being an extremist. And, so it was surely an interesting time. What I would like to get into though is that the experience I had within medical settings during that time it's still mind-blowing to me. It's mind-blowing to me that you're going to a place where you seek medical help, but they totally failed in providing this. And I think if you come into an emergency department and if I'm wrong, feel free to leave me some comments. But I'm pretty sure that the staff there would also be trained to assess people in a certain way and treat them in a certain way to make sure their mental health is okay as well. Because there's no doubt that if you have a car accident or whatever happens and you have to attend an emergency department, that you would be totally stressed. And that's something that's important to be addressed as well, not just the physical injury, correct? So, yeah, what happened was that, like, we were seeing doctors a lot more frequently than what we see them today, I would say. But like from like going to a GP because I don't know, needing a prescription or needing a certificate, whatever it was, or actually needing some help because of some health issues, whatever it was, like you were secluded, you had to sit in a separate area, you had to sit outside. It was almost like, dogs have to stay outside. It was a bit like that. So there was a lot going on that I don't think was right. And that's, look, I tell you, I think I could probably hold hundreds of episodes talking about these things because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of emotions and feelings coming up. What was an experience that really stuck with me was when my youngest went for a play date and I received a phone call that he fell. I think they were jumping on a couch and he fell and he hit the bridge of his nose or between the eyebrows against a coffee table corner. And he, you know, was likely needing some stitches. So I just wrapped up all my stuff at home and went to pick him up. And as I walked into the house, it was a bit chaotic because there was another little toddler there as well. And yeah, so it was a bit chaotic. The parents still joking. They were actually of like convinced of a different opinion than we were, but they were still kind enough to let our kids play with each other because that's how far it went, that people would not allow their kids to play with my kids because of the medical decision that we would make, which all of a sudden was important to people. But anyhow, so they were like playing and that accident happened and mom was still choking and, said, oh, maybe if you go to hospital, at least you get in and out quickly because they sort of did not want to have us in the building because we were dangerous. And anyways, as I arrived and I looked at my son and I noticed that they changed his clothes, which was a sign of that there was quite a bit of blood involved. And I think they did not want me to freak out. So they changed clothes and she put some steri strips on it, but it kept opening up and there was a lot of blood running down his face. And so I looked at her and I said, oh, it's all right. Like I won't have another choice. I will have to take him to ED and I have to see whether or not he needs some stitches. So I was super nervous. I was super nervous because I knew this was gonna be a difficult this was gonna be a difficult thing, and I had to say no a lot of times. And I think a lot of us don't really enjoy saying no or struggle with saying no or only learned it over the last years. I don't know. Some people still are not really good at it. But what I have learned, especially during the COVID time, and I think that was one of the really big takeaways in a positive, like from a positive point of view, was that we always have a choice. We can always say no, and people might not like it, but it ultimately is our choice, and we just have to stand with what we really believe in. So we went quickly back home. I grabbed a few things in a little backpack, also jumper because it's always cold in there. And I think I grabbed a banana and a bottle of water or something like that, just so we're prepared in case we have to wait long. And what happened was we went to the children's hospital and they had this big sea container right in front of the entrance. And I'm telling you, like the distance between the checkpoints they had was actually ridiculous. Like it did not make sense at all. And it was like now when I think about it, it makes me almost laugh. It was an absolute joke. There's a big sea container. There was two people looking just normal, no, any special dress up. They were wearing masks and they did ask us or me as the parent. I think my son wasn't required because he was only a toddler, but me as the parent, that I have to wear a mask. I'm like, okay, that's all right. I've got a mask exemption, so I'm trying to get my certificate out. And like, I'm clearly struggling, trying to comfort my child that's bleeding from the face, having a bag, holding him, and then getting my handbag out, trying to find the certificate in my wallet. So it was a bit of a stressful situation. Anyhow, I got it out. I showed it to those two people and they were totally fine with it. And they just told me that I have to go to the next checkpoint. And I'm telling you, that's really how ridiculous it was. It was literally, I turned around and the people were there. And they did not look normal at all anymore. They were all dressed up. They had gowns on, gloves, face masks, face shields, like next level, right? Like it was almost like you're watching a movie. And again, there was maybe a meter and a half at the most between those two checkpoints. And I'm being met by this nurse that had some sort of a power trip and was standing there with her clipboard. And she's like, so where's your nurse? Where's your mask? And she would, without a doubt, have heard the conversation I had with those other two people. There was no other patients inside. It was literally just us having this conversation. And I turn around and she's asked me the same questions again. And I said to her, look, I've just explained to them I've got a mask exemption. And she's like, well, I got to see the mask exemption. I'm like, really? Like, so I tried to stay calm. I did not want to cause any extra drama because I knew it was going to be difficult enough as it is already. So I did. I mean, I was clearly unimpressed and I asked her, said, did you not see that I just got it out? And she's like, well, she's just following the process, like very arrogant, very short, there was no empathy at all. I'm like, okay. So I got it out, I showed it to her, and she just ticked the box that she's seen my certificate. They put us a thermometer on the forehead, and then they let us in, and we came to the normal triage area at that hospital. And there was a nurse, which was just a lovely woman. She was very, very lovely. She was just neutral. That's what it felt like. It was a relief after meeting someone that's coming on so strong and, making you feel like you're doing the wrong thing, and everything you do, you're like, you're the disease. So it was really nice meeting someone, and she was pretty lovely, and I explained to her what had happened, and she had a little chat with my son, which was really nice because until this point, no one had done that. And I think it's frightening for a child enough to go to the hospital, having blood dripping from their face, just to be met by people that are actually not interested in their injuries, but more about seeing a certificate why you're not wearing a mask. Anyway, so we just got through. We were sent into the general waiting area, and as we walked in, I was just thinking to myself, I wonder how long it's going to take until they start harassing us. And we were sitting there, and there was quite a few families there still. It was a lot less busy than it would be if there's not a pandemic happening. So yeah, it wasn't too bad. So I was positively, like, my mindset was positive, and I thought hopefully it won't take that long. But just sitting there, and it took about 5 minutes, and I was approached by the first nurse, dangling a swab in front of my face and telling me that my son had to be swabbed. He needs to be tested. And, you know, when you deal with situations like that more often, and things seem to be more and more ridiculous as the days go by, it's really hard to take them serious. So in this very moment, I actually just pretended I had no idea what kind of test she meant. So I looked at her and I said, I don't know what test do you mean? And she said, oh, the red test, the red test. And I looked at her and I said, oh, I don't know what you mean, sorry. And I just looked at her, and I said to her, he's here because he's bleeding. He's got like a cut on his nose. And she was not happy, and she stormed off. And shortly after that, I was approached by another nurse, and, same thing. She was like, oh, we have to test your son. We have to test your son. And I'm like, what do you have to test him for? And she said, oh, for COVID. Like, it's, everyone knows what they get tested for. I'm like, yeah, but we're not here because we're having any cold or flu symptoms. He's completely asymptomatic, actually. We're just here because he's got a cut on his nose. And I mean, I looked at her, I said, you can see that there's blood dripping all over his face. And by then they put like a little gauze or something on there just so it wasn't as bad anymore, but there was dried up blood all over his face. And she's like, well, but it's what we have to do. And I said, well, what is it that you have to do? And she said, oh, we have to put a swab in the nose. It only takes seconds. And I said, yeah, but like, he fell on his nose. We don't even know if it is safe to shove a swab up his nose at this point. And she would just keep repeating the same phrase over and over, that it's the process and she just has to do it. And when she repeated it the third time, I had again this glimpse of like, she does actually not know what she's talking about. She's just repeating what she's been told to repeat. So I looked at her and I said, look, at this point, if a doctor refuses to look at him, then we will have to find some other solution. But if we have a say, I will not want him to be swapped. And she stormed off, and she was clearly pissed off, and told me that she will have to chat with the consultant, but she actually never came back. So it's kind of a little win. And then shortly after, they came to seclude us. And it was again just to prove a point, because we did not follow along with their process. We were put into a corner room. They shut the doors, and as they were approaching us, they were always coming with quite a bit of distance in between us, and had like face masks and shields and gloves and gowns and I don't know, like all sorts of stuff on. Like they did not even look like humans anymore. And anyway, they eventually treated my son. The doctor was actually pretty friendly and did not seem to have an issue with us not wearing a mask. And sure thing, about 4 days later, so we had to go back because my son, just an active kid, just I don't know what he did, but he must have hit it. So it was, they glued it in the end, but underneath it started bleeding a bit again. So we had to go back and get it checked out again. We had to go through exact the same procedure again, with the exception that this time the nice triage nurse was there again and she remembered us. And I actually said to her that I really appreciate how she's treated us a few days earlier and that this does not seem to be standard anymore. And she was a very, very warm and lovely woman. And she just asked me, she said, "Oh, would you like me to put you in that room that you were last time right away, just to avoid any other, possible confrontations beforehand?" So we actually chose to be in the corner room the second time around. And that was just, one of the experiences that we had. I learned over time that it is really important for our kids that we sometimes can stay a bit more composed and don't blow up in front of other people. And I don't think I did blow up, but I did have to stand my ground quite a bit. And I can see how this has also left some sort of scars in my children wherever we had to go. But I think overall I did a pretty good job, and there was a lot of scenarios where I feel like I could have lost my shit a lot earlier and I didn't actually do it. But what has come to my attention over the past 5, 6 years is that there have been situations where parents took their kids to the ED or, a doctor, and they wouldn't agree with the treatment plan, or all it was, there was a lady in Perth, and, some people might have heard this before. They actually went to the same hospital this happened to us. All they asked for was a second opinion for a chemotherapy treatment, and just because she questioned it and she was ready to take her son home and not start the treatment right away. And again, she's asked for a second opinion, and I think we're all entitled to that. They were really quick in threatening her with child protection services, taking the child away from her. The boy was actually taken off her, was sent into foster care. Was not that lady actually shared her story on a different podcast, and it was the most heartbreaking thing. And I pull my head that she could stay composed for so long and so calm, because she said she knew if she was gonna blow up, they would use all of that against her. And yeah, I think that boy had to go through like the absolute most terrible thing ever, treatment at a hospital for chemotherapy. And he was there all alone because the foster parents seemed not to care, and they would not let the actual mom into the room. Anyway, like it's just, it's just mind-blowing to me. How could we let this happen? How could we let it get that far, and to the point where we just disregard a mother's intuition and her right to have a second opinion? And really, let's face it, if you want to go down the road of a chemotherapy, you probably don't make much difference if you just wait a couple of days and see someone else before that, if that is the route you want to go down to. And I also had a similar situation with someone that's really close to me, where they wanted to give the newborn baby antibiotics, and she said no because She did not want her newborn baby that was only hours old to get antibiotics pumped into their body based on a lab result that was not even borderline for a newborn baby. And she's refused, and she was good to refuse for 12 hours. That's when they first time came in and threatened her again, Child Protection Services. We will take the child off you because you're neglecting your child's health. And it just, I just, I just, having heard all of those stories and, having gone through experiences ourselves the medical in a medical setting where we're supposed to get helped, but really all they do is just try to tick their boxes, and they get annoyed with you if you don't follow along or if you ask questions. They walk away and make jokes of you and things like that. It's just absolutely mind-blowing and also extremely concerning. So I found myself in the situation 10 days ago, thinking about all of those things at the same time, while being concerned that my son has an appendicitis, would potentially be extremely in trouble and would need medical attention as soon as possible. But I was hesitant going anywhere because I knew I will have to navigate. I will have to navigate this. And I'm sure you get my point. How wrong is that? How messed up is that we let this happen? And if we go back to all the COVID stuff, whether you've been on the same page as me and you felt like it was all rubbish and good on you for not following along and things like that, or if you are someone that did follow along and did believe some of the things they were told, regret it now or you don't regret it, whatever it is. I feel like what we have to understand is that this is like we lost humanity, like we lost compassion, like kindness. Like even if someone was not of the same opinion as me, I would not go up to them and tell them, hey, what's wrong with you? Why do you do that? You're stupid. You're that, and call them names and ostracize them and make them feel like they're second-class citizen. And yeah, I guess that's my message. That's my message today. Whether you've been on the same page or if you are of a different opinion and you actually think that everything they did during that time was right and, you followed along and you still believe it was the right thing to do, fair enough, man. I'm not someone that's trying to change your mind. I feel like I'm past this point. But I feel like at least offer the people around you that had a different opinion and went through similar experiences, possibly took the vaccine and got injured and all of those things. I mean, just allow them the space to share their experiences, their feelings, their emotions. And also, if you've been of the same opinion. And I meet people literally almost on a daily basis that have are somewhat like-minded, or even, didn't follow along with all of that stuff, but they still are afraid to speak it out, say it out loud. I'm like, if we had like if we don't keep this conversation going, what are we gonna do? Like I think a lot of people actually got really badly traumatized, and we just keep pushing it down and pushing it down, and I think we're just gonna create a problem further down the track, because it is so cliche, but it is so true. It will always keep bubbling up. It will always come back to the surface because it needs to be addressed. And I'm not sitting here and I'm not waiting for anyone to give me a call and apologize and acknowledge that I was right. That's not what this is about. And I'm not gonna lie, I have days when I feel like, man, just fucking admit it, okay? Because I'm also just human. But this is not what this is about. This is about just allowing people to keep having this conversation and share their experiences. And that's just, from a health point of view. there was other things going on. I mean, I got kicked out of my work. My kids got kicked out of swimming lessons. We were not allowed to attend the pool anymore. Like, it was absolutely ridiculous. My daughter was employee of the month just to get kicked out 3 weeks later. Was not allowed to be part of an ocean swim. How does it make sense? And how can we just get on with our lives and not, how can we just try to sweep this under the rug? I really believe that this is important for us and for our children, that we have this conversation and that we keep this conversation going, because a lot of the things that happened were not right. They were unkind. And I think that's something we have to be show it again, an example for our kids. Be kind, listen, have an open ear to those stories. And we don't have to agree. We don't have to agree on everything in life. Absolutely not. But maybe we can learn to respectfully disagree again, rather than making other people feel like they're the problem in the whole scenario. Anyway, that was my last 10 to 12 days. It was a constant up and down. And I hope you got something out of today. And I hope that you keep this conversation going, no matter what side you were on. It's even sad to talk of sides, but I think there was a big division. Anyway, keep that conversation going, and yeah, just be kind to one another. Bye.